Before I begin, I want to let you know that I will be using clips from a variety of horror movies and games. Primarily, you will see cutscenes and gameplay from Silent Hill 1 through 4 and the Resident Evil series. So, consider this a huge spoiler warning. Also, as the old warning states, you might see some things that are cruel or disturbing.
Can you tell me the best way to get to Silent Hill?
With the reintroduction of Silent Hill 2 back into the purview of the horror gaming space, I decided to revisit one of my favorites again. The first Silent Hill. For those that are unfamiliar with the Silent Hill games as a whole, the series is known for its masterful use of psychological horror within the subgenre of survival horror. Silent Hill itself, the name of the town that the games are titled after, is a place where the veil between the ordinary and the supernatural was shattered, causing nightmares to come pouring out from the psyche at the root cause of the event. It is also a phenomenon that can occur outside of the town proper and drag people into a horrific hellscape of blood, rust, fog, ever-changing locales, and darkness. Whether it be the town itself or elsewhere, if it beckons you or you're caught in it, you're going to have to fight or run away from demons spawned by your psyche or someone else's, and problem solve your way through the fog to come to terms with the inherent nature as to why you've been summoned.
I don't know what's happening. Do you know what's going on here?
In this video, I'm going to be looking at how aspects of horror are used in both its storytelling and gameplay, the usage of jump scares and horror and the place within the Silent Hill games. Primarily, I will be doing so by comparing Silent Hill 1 through 4, the Resident Evil series, a few horror films, and by analyzing the ways in which scares are utilized in both cinematic and gameplay scenarios. From a predominantly Western point of view, just to note, the only reason that I'm not using the Western games is because I'm just more familiar with Silent 1 through 3, and to a lesser extent 4.
That's fine. We can start now.
Due to the massive success and popularity of the Resident Evil series, as well as the derivatives and other works in different genres that had a similar feeling, atmosphere, and flow to the first game, it became the prime example of what a survival horror game is. It is not the first of its type, but it is one of the few titles that transcended beyond just being a horror game and having its place cemented in a genre-defining higher cultural status. Some of the main traits of a survival horror game are characters being dropped in horrific situations with limited means to defend oneself and having some form of item management, including but not limited to a small amount of inventory slots. When survival horror is mentioned as a descriptor, most of the times people mean something with the structure of the early Resident Evil games. As of Resident Evil 4, the series got the designation of action horror as it moved away from the haunted house affair that was RE1, or even the assault on Precinct 13, Dawn of the Dead feel of RE2, to a more bombastic in-your-face action thrill ride. The second subclass of the many subclassifications in the horror genre is psychological horror. Now, that is actually a term used not only for games but films, literature, and any other form of expression as well. It's a brand of horror that usually focuses on the state of mind of a character, the shifts in psychological conditions, and the emotion that they espouse to disturb, cast uncertainty to the audience, and or frighten the player. Some of the markers of them are unreliable narrators and characters having to deal with the effects of isolation, whether it be physical or mental. Oftentimes, you can find them falling into a descent into madness. Both descriptors come with different expectations, even if some titles can and do exist in the same genre. Both Silent Hill and Resident Evil can be described as survival horror games. The biggest of differences between the two is the subject matter, as well as how it expresses and utilizes fear against the player. Some of Resident Evil's most memorable moments come from jump scares, whereas with Silent Hill, you're bound to hear about some eldritch abomination that was nailed to a wall in a dilapidated grocery store that smells like old blood and has the sound of a rusty fan scraping against its flesh. One is more of a slow build that drowns you you in its atmosphere. The other terrifies you with the unseen and not knowing if you have enough bullets to deal with whatever is hiding around the corner. Well, except the Silent Hill series does both type of scares, which leads me to my next point about perception and how it affects the way the Silent Hill games are viewed, both mechanically and cerebrally.
What are you talking about?
When Silent Hill 2 dropped in 2001, there actually wasn't much like it. While not at the immediate start, it would go on to be lauded for its story. And as one of the de facto examples of what gaming could be as an art form, the extremely heavy focus on strong characterizations of its cast set it apart from most horror games. The way it tackled subject matter as heavy as euthanasia, sexual assault, and wasn't overly juvenile in its execution. The horror elements were personalized to James, and that made it stand out even compared to Silent Hill 1. The voice acting, while contentious, was filled with emotion. The way the endings were handled was inventive, the soundtrack sublime. Even though it was a sequel, it wasn't a direct continuation, so anyone could jump in without being lost in regards to a continuing narrative. The first and second game were truly unique in terms of the experience that they provided. While it did not go on to sell 11 million copies like GTA did, the series would go on to have multiple titles before it went dormant after 2012. Rewinding it back a bit, Silent Hill 1 left such a profound effect on the film director Christoph Gans that he worked feverishly to get the rights to make a movie for the series, specifically his take on Silent Hill 1. It would later go on to be produced and released in 2006 to mixed reviews from fans. This is also where the series and its place in the public mindscape takes a divergent path. Silent Hill 2 managed not only to warp how the series was known at large, but the movie itself did the same for the games, specifically Silent Hill 1. The film traces the origin from the original for a setting that takes place in an abandoned town affected by a coal fire. Due to this, the ground in the film is covered with ash. Neither is the case in the games. In Silent Hill 1, it is in fact snow that Harry is running through, and the town itself has nothing to do with a coal fire. People unfamiliar with the finer details of the story, even if they played it, would go on to conflate the two. Pyramid Head has nothing to do with anyone aside from James. However, due to the film, his popularity skyrocketed, and he became viewed as a stalker-like figure that punishes people that end up in Silent Hill's other world. Later, he would show up again in various games, including the mainline game, Silent Hill Homecoming. Even memes for the series stuck around. If it was foggy outside in real life, it looked like you were walking through Silent Hill. It would forever be compared to Raccoon City in terms of which place would be the worst to get stuck in. Back in the gaming space, it would go on to influence a lot of upcoming artists and developers, indie and mainstream alike, for years to come. Due to the series' aesthetic and primary use of the everyday individual as the protagonist, the games never really had a focus on providing an elevated combat system. Unlike the cast of Resident Evil, these characters typically don't have military or survival training. The mechanics were serviceable, or even described as bad, and that was on full display in Silent Hill 2. The thing is, Silent Hill 1 had a lot going on that wasn't immediately obvious if you weren't paying attention. There's a dodge button that is paced in sync with how slow all of the other enemies are. There's an overpowered stealth mechanic. Harry is practically invisible when you turn the lights and radio off. Melee weapons could stun lock enemies and do absurd amounts of damage. Unlike Jill Valentine and the rest of the Resident Evil crew, Harry Mason could move, shoot, and strafe in 1999. 2 felt like a small step down in that department. It's not a problem, and honestly it fits the characters. While Harry's a regular man, he is also heroic and focused on a singular point. As a parent that lost a child, there is no introspection to be had for him until after the events in Silent Hill 1, as he detailed in a journal that he left for his daughter. There is no delusion to crawl from under. Harry just has his mission to find Cheryl Mason and not stop until it's done. One conversation in a strip club had James ready to risk it all for Maria.
I can't do anything through these bars.
Okay. Stay right there. I'll be there soon.
The density of the atmosphere, while similar, is not weighted through in the same intervals. Silent Hill 2 starts off slowly with the mystery and ramps up the tension until you finally reach the gates of hell. Silent Hill 1, on the other hand, throws you in the deep end of the pool right from the jump. If you want to take your time to search for help, the powers that be force you to progress forward. As you follow Cheryl, you are faced with the most nightmarish imagery imaginable. 5 minutes in, it is by all means in your face about how much of a terrifying experience it's trying to be, even with the focus on the themes at play. Silent Hill 2 is probably considered to be the best of the entire franchise by a large amount of people. It became the example of what the game should strive to be like, and for better or worse, later games seemingly drew from it the most. It's the blueprint for how people visualize the series. Unfortunately, that also comes at the cost of some of the enjoyable aspects of the other games being obscured by its large shadow. It's somehow a series that shouldn't have the spectacle that jump scares bring. Combat should always be poor. It needs to have an extreme examination of your playable character's psyche, even at the expense of creativity. Why wouldn't you want more of what you consider to be one of the greatest games of all time? I want to circle back around to jump scares and regular scares. In general, it is interesting how varied the opinions of them are within the context of what the games do and how they are structured and utilized. When it comes to discussions of the different conventions in the horror movie genre, few things can divide fans more than the substantive differences and effectiveness of scares, especially jump scares. Within the variety of approaches to thrilling the audience, the main dividing line for implementation of said scares is whether or not a person finds them to be cheap or earned. There is no specific criteria for defining the two explicitly. However, they can be and are oftentimes reduced to whether or not an individual bought the setup for it. A sudden noise, randomly shattering the silence to send the audience careening back in the chairs, can fulfill the same purpose as a methodically laid out escalation to a scare that does the same thing. So why is one more acceptable than the other? People don't like to feel cheated for their investment in a scene. One can feel more organic to the storytelling, and the other can feel like an obvious tool to drive engagement with the viewer. Unfairly or not, individuals oftentimes use the usage to inform the quality of and type of subgenre the movie resides in on a surface level. Jump scares can also be used to in detriment and cause fatigue and or immunity to the reason for their existence. Suspension of disbelief is now shattered and directorial intention is laid bare for all. At base, you can declare that the only real difference between the two is personal preference. In a lot of cases, you would probably be right. I personally don't think that every scare labeled as a cheap jump scare is one, nor do I think that they are inherently bad. I don't think that my entertainment is lesser or greater than another for having them or lacking them. It's all about implementation.
Look out! It's a monster!
Even though the first stop to make in order to look at the origin of the modern jump scare is 1942, I want to briefly mention two other films that come before it. 1920's The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari and 1896's Les Manoirs du Diable, or The Haunted Castle / The House of the Devil. Obviously, I wasn't around for the release of The Haunted Castle, so I can only speculate as to the response to some of the techniques used. Even though I don't find this scary due to a host of reasons, it's easy for me to imagine that the sudden appearances and changes of characters, like the skeleton into the bat, were not only for narrative purpose, but to shock and stun the viewers. Even now, you can see techniques and ideas used in modern day horror films. That said, I'm hesitant to give this the title of first due to its pacing and construction. There isn't enough time to even set up a scare the way that we are accustomed to nowadays, because there isn't room for anything to breathe and the story is told in a relatively quick manner, without doing so at the expense of the narrative. It is a very short film after all. The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari has moments that are punctuated with music and spots where a scare might organically be placed, or where a scene of intensity may rest during black transitions with text on the screen. The intentionality is felt even without the fluidity of a continuous shot. It is still very much a horror movie, and its expression isn't hindered by a lack of modern technology, same as Le Manoir du Diable. That said, I still wouldn't count it as being the origin of the modern jump scare. I would be remiss not to mention the 1922 version of Nosferatu. Technically speaking, the way it utilizes cuts in its editing to make Count Orlok appear and reappear is definitely a defining trait in the way certain scares are structured. However, as you will see, the more popular scares with lengthy setups take after another film. One might bring up a certain scene in Citizen Kane where he all but threw a peacock at the screen to wake the audience up. While yes, it can be considered a jump scare, the intention of it was to make people pay attention in the theater. It didn't occur during a drastic tonal shift in the film, and it wasn't used to thrill or reward the audience's emotional expenditure. It may trigger a fight or flight response and carry the functionality of a jump scare, but the use case is different. Cat People is the film that is largely looked upon as the mother of the modern jump scare. For a bit of brief background as to what is going on in this clip, the woman being followed, Alice, is a friend and co-worker to the lady in the black coat's husband. Her name is Irina. She was caught having a late dinner with the husband, Oliver, and Irina has been drowning in a well of insecurity, the feeling of loneliness, as well as the fear that stems from her beliefs in a legend from the locale of her birth. She believes that if she were to engage in any sexual activity with her husband, that she will turn into a cat and kill the person that she cares for. Obviously, this has put a strain on her relationship, and she's starting to spiral. It doesn't help that it's obvious as to what the evolving nature of her husband's relationship with Alice is, so she's stalking her, kind of like a cat. Now, this isn't the most complex of jump scares to ever exist. However, you can see the foundation of almost every jump scare to ever be put to screen in its execution. She's walking and being stalked by someone that only the audience could see at first, then her stalker disappears, as well as our knowledge of the certainty that she's still being chased. Did the curse activate off camera? While we're wondering where she went, she begins to feel like she's being watched and starts to run. Panic sets in for both her and the audience for similar reasons. We're both looking for someone or something that may or may not be there any longer, and we lack the required information to make a rational decision as to what's really happening in the moment. She stops, and then a loud ass noise breaks the tension as the bus rolls into frame. It's not as overly elaborate of a setup as the scare in Lights Out or the immediate resolution of a scene like the chase in Mama, nor does it have the payoff from the lead into the scare as the popular hand clap scene from The Conjuring. However, it is every bit as organic as they are, and even more so than ones that people consider to be cheap.
Do you see it?
What I like about this is that they not only play off of old tropes, high Jonesy, but also within the confines of Silent Hill and how it functions. The first scare is fairly typical and signposted as soon as you enter the room. Not only that, but it messes with you seconds after it happens. The cat jumps down and proceeds to be unceremoniously murdered by someone or something off screen, in the direction that you need to go. The second scare builds off of the knowledge gained off of the first one, and it defies expectations and catches you when your guard is fully down. Its effectiveness is due to its simplicity, use of time, and space. Plenty of games will have you walk past an area multiple times before springing the scare. Here, instead of an arbitrary number, the scare is based off of progress. It's paced far enough away from the initial jump scare that it gives you enough time to think about everything else happening in the world. By the time you get back, it's easy to forget that you heard the cat die. You check the locker, fully expecting something else to jump out at you again. This time, you're greeted with an immense amount of blood that's filled the locker. The cat didn't die twice, so either something else was murdered in it, or someone kept something they killed stowed away. You walk away from it, and bam, the locker flies open and out drops a corpse and an item you need for progression. It plays not only on your memory, but your imagination as well. I love it.
Magic, baby. Lipstick cam, drone, LEDs.
Discussing horror in the gaming sphere, one of the more highly debated conversations is about the functionality of a camera system used within the game itself. A debate that really widened and opened up in discussion due to the proliferation of the over-the-shoulder camera used in Resident Evil 4. Before RE4, for better or worse, changed not only the landscape for horror, but games themselves. It was usually about whether or not third-person camera systems were better for instilling terror than first first person. Typically speaking, it can also lead to a conversation about control schemes, even more specifically being about whether or not tank controls are better suited for delivering scares or make the most sense with the static cameras that are used throughout the genre. Everyone has their opinions on the subject, and I'm not here to debate if they're good or not. However, I do think it is very important to mention that at the time, for a while, that particular control method was what you had to work with. From a visual point of view, when third-person cameras are mentioned, in regards to how old classic survival horror games were expressed, is partially in reference to the primary use of static and every manner of tracking camera shots for you to navigate the environment with. Static camera shots are shots in film that are devoid of camera movements. They're on a tripod. For example, here's a shot from a movie I enjoyed called Ada. Notice the usage of space around Ada while she's praying and Wanda while she's leaning on the car. They take up a much smaller amount of real estate on the screen in comparison to everything else. In a movie like this, such a shot can be indicative of the characters feeling small in comparison to the larger world around them, their navigation of it, as if there is much to discover, or in Ida's case, it can signify views on God and spirituality, wavering or not. Tracking shots encompass a variety of camera movements such as dolly and trucking shots. In the interaction between cinema and gameplay, these types of cameras can be and are viewed by some as where the language of film is at its most legible. One of the more popular discussion points for these particular type of camera techniques is that it's easier to scare the player because you have more control over how to terrify them due to being able to carefully hide creatures, items, and environmental hazards out of the field of view, be it around corners or walls. There is also the idea that there is more of a possibility to assign meaning to the viewpoint. For instance, in Resident Evil, a series whose thematic elements are rooted in the backdrop of corporate greed, mad science, eugenics, and unfettered capitalism, a static camera can cause the feeling of you being watched by whomever the villain is, or the company itself. Thanks to the backtracking you often find yourself engaged in, it can cause you to feel like a lab rat in an experiment. Silent Hill took it a step further and had scenes and gameplay segments that felt like you had an actual cameraman running alongside of you. The angles used can be even more art house and disorienting, and can cause the feeling of being watched by a singular entity, to the world judging you itself. Even the player can slip into the role of a voyeuristic being with a curiosity likened to L.B. Jeffries from Rear Window. The biggest differential and cause for disagreements over which is better for horror to begin with is that over-the-shoulder camera systems don't lend well to that variety and type of filmic expression that you would find from static cameras while you're playing. What it doesn't mean is that more traditional cutscenes aren't included in the process. Just like the first-person games and games with over-the-shoulder cameras, cutscenes are used for everything including storytelling, as well as introducing an area puzzle, highlighting an enemy, or to set up a scare. To quickly compare, I'm going to play part of the intro of Silent Hill 2 Enhanced Edition and the Silent Hill 2 Remake, and take note of my feelings about the differences. Now, this is going to be a touch unfair because I've already played and beaten the OG Silent Hill 2 many years ago, while with the remake, I just started it fairly recently. Haven't beaten it yet, and still have the first impressions fresh in my mind. The games have two different voices, and I already have fairly strong opinions on James as is. Right off the bat, due to the angle used, it looks as though the world just drops off into nothing, almost as if you're running alongside an endless abyss. It shifts from feeling above James to being far removed from him, as if you're not supposed to be close to this man at all. The trees forming a sort of divide between us and him. At a certain point, the configuration makes it seem like we're watching him run behind bars, as if he's been caged. The noise made by the creature sounds unnatural and begs to question intention. You can't see it, you also can't really look for it due to the camera. Wild animals don't typically just let out noises around humans for fun. Either you're impeding upon their territory, or it feels as though it's in danger and it's getting you to back down. The world feels wrong, and it looks like he's being isolated by it. Due to the camera's position in the remake, it's a lot easier to become solely focused on what's in front of you, instead of how off it feels when you gaze into the fog on the sides. While James feels small in this as well, that particular feeling is reached due to how gigantic and overbearing the world is. It's a forest that looks like a forest, not one that's mocking you with how openly sinister it is. The act of walking through it gives off the same vibes as being overwhelmed by or overtaken by nature itself. However, it gives off a similar feeling of being corralled somewhere somewhere, and not just because you're walking down a path that you might have traveled before. The monster sounds slightly more organic to the area, and while it brings to mind similar thoughts, it's sounding more like something within the realm of reality gives a touch more calm to the locale. It's easier to wrap your head around something that sounds like it follows the rules of nature. It is off enough to put you off of ease though, because there is a quality to it that sounds, how to say, not right. The biggest difference in perspectives between the two can be summed up as the difference between I and he, as well as the distance between us. In the remake, you're closer to him as well as the ground. You have no choice but to share in this particular moment. It feels like I'm doing something that I normally wouldn't, and that's walk in the woods by myself. It's as if something is stalking me. It's a bit more personal in terms of space, whereas in the first game, it feels like the game is actively warning me not to get overly close to this strange man. Both reach similar points by the end, but the stories feel a bit more varied. Again, two different voices are telling the same story. To make another comparison, let's quickly look at Resident Evil 2 and the remake. While the original RE2 might have what feels like a more exploratory essence to it due to length, the vibes between the two feel largely the same. The remake's intro is more compressed once you hit the streets properly. At most, the original instills a bit more desperation due to the inclusion of Kendo's death in the gun shop, as well as the amount of time it takes to even see the gates to the RPD. This is a slight enough variance to matter because it does illustrate how dire everything is, because a fully stocked gun store is one of the last places you would expect someone to just get off 60 seconds into the game. Even with that difference, the tone doesn't change and the voice is largely similar. The intentions of both are unified. A difference of camera doesn't necessarily mean that the unheard text of the scene will be 100% rewritten. One could also posit that it's easy to get caught up in the fact that this particular camera type brings you closer to the action and therefore compels you to engage with the action as opposed to one of its counterparts. I think that notion itself is inherently false. At the onset of a new scene, the primary director still has total control over what you see at the first point in time due to the structure of the locale. You, the player, still have the freedom, the choice, and the ability to run away. That hasn't changed in the slightest. Scares, enemies, and items can still be hidden in the environment or missed due to your field of view. Any incentives that one may have to fight instead of run away from the enemies has always existed, even within the static angles itself. Finally, we have the first person's perspective. Like the over-the-shoulder camera systems, it trays the use of the camera as one particular type of artistic tool for having you walk in the character's own shoes. Games like Half-Life 2 take it a step further and went to great lengths to make you feel even more embedded in the world itself because of the dialogue and praise that Alex and the other NPCs would lay upon you, as well as the fact that you don't actually see Gordon's face. Even if he did speak, this particular perspective lends well to making you, the person, feel more integrated within the story, due to how little time you will spend looking at how a character is modeled. In terms of experiencing the game world itself, the rules for engaging with the environment are the exact same. The opening shot is that of the principal photographers. Before you take over, you see what they want you to see at first. So while there may be artistic limitations to certain camera types as a secondary framing device or tool of mood, games with the over-the-shoulder cameras or that are in first person will switch into traditional storytelling, with the exception of first-person games that have in-game story or cinematic segments. At that point, the difference between game and film is lost, and it's more akin to watching a short or a movie. Minor exception being that you're waiting to take control of the action again. Or it's a game where you're constantly looking for button prompts to press during the cinematics. Let's not forget that some games utilize multiple camera systems to great effect. For instance, the more recent Sorry We're Closed has the traditional static camera for you to navigate the environment in, a first-person perspective for combat, and storytelling segments delivered via cutscenes.
You actually caught things on film?
By utilizing horror film techniques while taking advantage of the unique connection between player and character that only games can afford, the camera itself can be used as an agent of the enemy by playing on the focus of memory and attention span of the player while in the game itself and outside of the confines of a cutscene. Take Resident Evil, for example. There is a window that is framed in such a fashion that it's almost obvious that it's going to be a trigger for a scare or two. However, you walk past the window a few times times and absolutely nothing happens. Finally, once the proper conditions are met, the scare occurs. The reward for the normalization of a terrible situation, as well as the pacification of the necessity to investigate a particular thing within the environment. Having less of a field of view and more of control of where the player's sightlines are makes it super easy to throw a random thrill at you when you aren't paying attention. While the player is in an exploratory mood, zooming in on items once picked up can cause the player to miss an enemy scuttling across the floor in the blurred background. The camera can also be used to toss red herrings at the player while they're running around with any perspective. Even with cameras that aren't quite over the shoulder but still closer to the ground can be used against the player being accustomed to a particular viewpoint. For instance, it may spin around the player character and cause disorientation to impress upon the frenetic circumstances that you have to adapt to, even when transitioning from a cutscene. Case in point, running around a hallway in Silent Hill 3. Not only is it incredibly easy to lose track of an enemy, it is also profoundly easy to lose track of where you are and where you are going. Having these things occur simultaneously can cause an increase in anxiety, as well as cause you to forget what it was you were even doing in the area to begin with. In this scenario, it's multi-purpose in usage. That's why a large percentage of people spend more time looking at the map screen than they do actually playing the Silent Hill games.
Look at this map. Memorize it.
When looking at fear within this series, there's one aspect of it that isn't easily hidden in the days of data mines, streaming, and social media. That is the result of any ability to change the narrative. When given choice, players subconsciously can be goaded towards a particular end result, depending on their own views of the characters and their relationships with the story. Obviously, there are a variety of ways going about this. Binary choice in dialogue trees and actions is one instance that can be found almost anywhere. The other would be item hunts that trigger events, or you can do something akin to what Silent Hill 2 did, which is hide it beneath a set course of actions that a player may or may not take, wholly dependent on a factor of the other two options tied together. Are you spending a lot of time getting cozy with Maria, going out of your way to protect her, making sure that her emotional needs are met, ever so slowly distracting yourself from your mission to find your dead wife? Or you could be consistently looking at Angela's knife. Why are you staring at it so hard? It couldn't possibly be because... Or, and then there's the letter. What is this feeling you get from consistently opening it every hour? The game didn't tell you to do that. Maria didn't. Your precious Mary didn't do it either. Fear doesn't just have to mean jumping out of your chair, but with information, it can also lead to the fear of missing out. It can mean being afraid that your actions will lead to a terrible ending for a character that you've grown attached to. While locking out someone from getting a particular conclusion might seem mean-spirited, it's also a very effective way of forcing someone to play more cautiously if they become aware of the variance. Now, applying this to the more primal response triggered via fight or flight, the same rules can apply to the ecosystem of survival horror games when it comes to resource management. The ones that do have it, you can set up the proverbial carrot on a stick and guide them to setups even outside of required items needed to progress. For example, in Silent Hill 3, there's the infamous mirror/storeroom. This room is multi-purpose. It fills the role of maxing out your anxiety while also inviting you to stick around to see what else happens. It could be seen as representative of not only the unseen and the damage that it's doing, her connection to Silent Hill proper, corruption from the cult, among other things. It also feels like a bit of a warning. If you don't actually try to do something to save yourself, then there is the real possibility that it will ultimately kill you. Half of the reward you get for seeing this through is a game over, but the other half is more emphasis and hints to the cyclical nature of its story. All of this would have been missed if they didn't restrict the freedom of the person and bait them with the item under the box.
You opened it. We came.
Even when looking at the framework of how games are afforded the freedom of borrowing from film to deliver narrative and setting, there are some differences that cause the similar use cases for jump scares to diverge. When you're watching a film or listening to an audio story or reading a book, you aren't a member of the production team. At most, you control what it is that you see or hear and miss out on, for instance, by closing your eyes. You don't ever touch a camera. Therefore, if a scare is either meticulously planned out or inserted into a scene haphazardly, the scope of your interaction with it doesn't change beyond the stated. With the gaming, it's an entirely different story. Depending on the intention of the developers, you can choose to miss out on a scare, or do so accidentally. Even during the parts that most resemble the structure of films, cutscenes can be skipped depending on the developer's intentions. They oftentimes overlooked, for good or bad, rules that one might find at a theater don't always apply, especially during the age where a lot of people experience the game through their favorite streamer. An alert can sound during a moment where an audio scare happens, and the streamer can get frightened by a cue that's not even in the game. When the conditions are right and the player actually interacts with the scare in a game, the biggest differential is the variety of outcomes that can occur to change the player's moment-to-moment experience. To put it plainly, unlike with a film, a player is in control of the character. So while scares might not always be utilized in a fashion to punish the player for vying into the artist's world, in some instances, it can be the difference between clearing a room or triggering a fail state. To the player, moments of loss aren't all weighed equally. Say you got scared and your only punishment was that you took damage. How much health did you lose? The value of your healing items increases if you don't have a lot of them. If your healthcare insurance is poor, how much slower are you going to play? Or are you going to take more risks to get through the next situation as quickly as possible and bank on using your items later? How much confidence did you lose? When was the last time that you saved? Was it 5 minutes ago? An hour ago? Did you forget because you were so focused on the game or talking to chat? Did it cause you to get a game over? Does that level of failure cause the game itself to restart? Now it's not just a matter of whether or not a brief instance of loss of control fits the bill of being scary, but was it fair? Or did it waste a player's time? Anger is now an emotional response that has a higher chance of surfacing. That in and of itself can be used to great effect at manipulating a person's engagement with the presented situation. So, technically, while the use case for jump scares are mostly the same for both mediums, including them being used as a reward, there is a bit more trust placed on the player than the passive viewer to set the conditions to interact with the game in its best light.
I saw something.
One of the most prominent means of relaying events, past, present, and future, to the player is done via notes, videos, or audio logs placed intricately throughout the game world. In most instances, they are used to detail events of the past to coax the player into feeling a particular emotion or set the tone for a specific situation. The infamous Itchy Scratchy Tasty note found in Resident Evil catalogs a previous person's descent into madness before they ultimately succumb to the T-virus. It's sad and used to punctuate how evil the Umbrella Corporation is, not only to the surrounding population, but its very own workers. The Keeper's Diary also humanizes the zombie that promptly tries to eat you after you're done reading it. In other scenarios, such as the hospital section in Silent Hill 3, the notes are used to not only build upon the themes dealing with womanhood, but also to chill the player, due to the note being written in real time as you explore the hospital. The stalker is watching your every single move and has a very violent, narcissistic, and possessive nature. You don't see them alive at any point during your entire stay, but their escalating behavior can cause anyone to constantly look over their shoulder. In this instance, the notes were used to scare in the present. The use of notes and journals are a tool that leaves open a vast amount of space for hypercreativity. People often decry the usage of notes due to how they can be overly used to communicate background information in vast amounts. Some developers have balanced this by utilizing audio journals, videos, and games, or having NPCs, friend, neutral, or foe, talk to each other.
Jill, see if you can find any other clues. I'll be examining this.
Whether it be supposedly vacant houses that suspiciously shut you in when you cross the threshold, labs with signs of humanity's worst behaviors, or what feels like constantly changing surroundings, environmental isolation is another frequently used tool of the genre. The Silent Hill series is uniquely positioned to take full advantage of this due to the very changing nature of the town itself. Admittedly, one of the aspects of it and its multiple realms that I feel can go unappreciated are the locked doors. It's not a unique or uncommon element, however, I do think that they serve a purpose other than not having hardware power necessary to render a ton of empty rooms with nothing in them other than peeling wallpaper and an empty bed. Throughout the series, you might start off the games alone, while you try and find purpose or person. Usually, sooner than later, you'll find at least one other person or manifestation that the town has either summoned or that stumbled upon the nightmare by mistake. Even still, the town cuts you off from the rest of humanity. If the point wasn't driven home hard enough by the broken streets and massive walls that block all escape, the locked doors surely will. Buildings that look like they should be filled with life only have a select few doors open for you to explore. Inhuman noises and whispers can emanate from rooms that you can't enter in places where the only sign of a human being present is you. Doors once closed and now open give the correct impression that someone or something is guiding you through hell with ill intentions. Or it can be a false promise of the comfort that company can bring.
We should have left when Mia wanted to.
One of the main concerns when playing a horror game is how long the period of time it is before the player becomes profoundly accustomed to the general flow and direction of terror that permeates the surroundings. The repetition of scares can cause a player to go from cautious anxiety-filled exploration to expecting the unexpected to happen, to actively looking for it, prioritizing the thrill while dulling the release that it brings. Viewing it through the contextualization of how Resident Evil handles pacing is one of the easiest ways to illustrate my point. It isn't unheard of for someone to mention how for a lot of the games, the more horror-filled aspects seem almost reticent as the games reach their final hours. By the start of Act 3, you're usually in a lab fighting some creatures with almost infinite ammo. The scares are close to non-existent. Part of this is intentional, but the other is due to the nature of how its scares are usually structured. You can only turn a corner and see a zombie, a hunter, or a dog so many times before it becomes rote. Even then, setups for long planned out jump scares feel non-existent nowadays. While the set dressing towards the end can be dripped in sci-fi horror, it really has started to feel more surface level than anything designed to disturb you to your core. Later games in the series, mainly the first-person ones, have segments that are purely designed to evoke terror by removing elements that contribute to the arms race that the characters are dropped in as soon as you press start. Still, by the end, the result is the same. It's not to say that it's wrong or should change, but just a minor observation that leads to my next point. Silent Hill, or rather the first 4 games, typically don't have that problem. It doesn't have as much to do with bullet count or weapon variety. It has very little to do with the character backstory buy-in that you have, thanks to them wearing regular clothes. It's not about whether or not they're Special Forces characters. Silent Hill protagonists are as guilty as the Resident Evil crew when it comes to fighting off large abominations. In Silent Hill's case, you have people that look like your unassuming next door neighbor fighting off deities. All of this can and does contribute to the broader outlook of the game as a whole. It's the pacing and how carefully integrated and cohesive the scares are, and how the environments work together with them in tandem. The choreographed nature of the presences that forces its will upon the surrounding and bends the laws of nature feels as though it has spent years practicing each step to constantly mess up your day. Even with 1 million bullets, the True Dragon Sword, enough health drinks to fix healthcare in America, a bulletproof vest, and Master Chief's battle rifle, you're still walking slowly through one of the most hellish scenarios imaginable, and it actually feels that way from start to finish. Enemy placement functions as it does in any horror game, and it can turn into Silent Rainbow Six if you choose to play it that way. However, there is a balance that is maintained with them jumping out of closets at you, and with every scare, cheap jump scare or not, that pops up when you least expect it. My intention isn't to directly compare the two and resolve which series does horror better, but to add on to my assertion that specific types of scares are in fact fine in the Silent Hill series as a whole. In this next section, I will be referencing and talking about some of the crueler aspects of the series, as well as certain genres in horror. One of the main topics covered by Silent Hill 1 through 4 is bodily autonomy and the violation of it. Although I won't be showing anything overly explicit or going into the lurid details, there will be imagery and language used that can be triggering. If you haven't played the games, I will be spoiling them. You have been warned. Also, some terminology might sound exclusionary. However, it is due to the times in which these were made and not me intentionally overlooking people.
Tell me what's going on here.
Violence against women in horror is as ubiquitous as the gore-filled scenes in slashers or ghosts that haunt the houses of white Catholics.
There's always some stupid bullshit reason to kill your girlfriend.
Silent Hill is no different. It doesn't reach the more exploitative and oftentimes schlocky presentation of certain films that exist in the rape revenge subgenre of horror, a subgenre made mainstream by Wes Craven's The Last House on the Left, which was a retelling of Ingmar Bergman's Jungfraujochn, or The Virgin Spring, minus the religious undertones. The devs never frame the extreme levels of violence in a voyeuristic manner. It's never fetishized, and in most cases, you never witness the violence on screen. Unfortunately, the one area in which these games, and ultimately the rest of the franchise, kind of falls behind the horror genre as a whole, is the lack of female protagonists. Sadly, it is in step with the genre in regards to the representation of people of color and the lack thereof. Up until the upcoming Silent Hill F, Cheryl Mason is the only mainline female protag that you play as. I'm fully aware of what Downpour's narrative conceptual framework is, as well as Shattered Memories twists. I mean actual gameplay and not just the story. When viewing how horror is contextualized in these first 4 games, and why it is that the stories affect different people the way that they do, it is important to point out that the first 4 games have a running line about bodily autonomy, including sexual assault and forced pregnancy, ritualistic violence, religious indoctrination, loss of adolescence, childhood abuse, emotional manipulation, and assault that connects them on a thematic level. From the religious indoctrination and loss of both childhood and personhood of the first game, its terrible end for a girl forced to grow up faster than she should have because the adults in her life succeed in using her body against her wishes, the forced and violent removal of adolescence, to the continuation of that theme in Silent Hill 2 with Angela's tragedy, seeing how depression and trauma overall can age you. You have the various ways in which Maria was killed off, both unceremoniously as well as in a ritual-like nature. Then you have Mary, who was murdered by her husband. Silent Hill 3 is about womanhood and anger, and for reasons made clear at the midway point, takes elements from Silent Hill 1 and almost removes subtlety from the equation entirely. It also doubles back on childhood abuse and religious indoctrination. Silent Hill 4 builds upon the hospital scare and representation of stalking from the mall, hospital, and subway, and takes it to another terrible reality with what could potentially happen if either is left unchecked or if there isn't another person around to help or actually care, like is oftentimes the case. In Silent Hill 1, the town is warped by someone else. The merging of despair, finality, and anger into an apocalyptic hellscape happens on summon of Harry and his daughter. The shifting of night and day in the opening gambit makes the world feel larger, cataclysmic in nature. A crucified body on barbed wire almost serves as an effigy, a warning, maybe to Harry or someone else. While clues litter the streets to give Harry a sense of direction, the primary violence was never specifically aimed at him. He, like the other victims of the nightmare, just got caught in it. The monsters weren't manifestations of his fears, but creations from another party, fairy tale drawings made real in the ever-expanding nightmare. Harry is the unlikely hero, a pawn in a supernatural scheme that he really had nothing to do with outside of being a good Samaritan and rescuing a baby left on her own with his late wife assisting him. While Silent Hill opens playing on the fears of a parent blinking and losing their child among a dense crowd, it's about Alessa's survival. Alessa just wanted her mother. That's it. Instead, she was forced into a ritual against her will with the aims of making her carry a god to term. After being burned horrifically critically to the point where she should have died, the very same group of adults continue to keep her alive in hopes of completing the ritual while they wait for the other half of her soul to return. She isn't referred to as a child, teen, or young adult in a loving manner, mainly as a tool or a demon. While Lisa Garland is a participant in what happens to Alessa, she's also taken advantage of by the same cult. Kaufman fuels her addiction and forces her to be a party to Alessa's continued tortured existence. At the end of it all, against her best efforts, and thanks to Harry being manipulated, she ends up birthing the cult's god and dies shortly after. Lisa, broken by the acceptance of her unreality, shifts into a vengeful spirit and drags Kaufman to hell where he belongs. Anyone can walk through someone else's nightmare in search of someone or some purpose. The scares never feel like they're trying to provoke a specific response out of Harry, the character, not the player. A Cheshire cat jumps out of a locker. An item makes the sound of a caged bird. Who else has been caged in this story? You're chasing after your daughter and see a beware of dog sign and follow her in and see a skinned animal, it and the body on the fence, and the dog head next to the basketball hoop all feel like they serve as a warning as to what's to come when you enter the nightmare properly. Some of the more fun scares also carry aspects of the story. Silent Hill 2, being the inversion that it is, felt more localized and personal to the character that you were controlling. Things like the whispers in the ear can be equated to numerous scenarios that he might have found himself in, like being in a strip club. Or it could be the low voice of his bedridden wife calling out to him from beyond closed doors. The dread is of the slow acceptance of truth for James, and the player's understanding of what happened to Angela. The terror is born from James. It is of James. Silent Hill 1 was built off of a different type of violence, and that is one of the primary reasons why, even though both games exist in the same town, they feel incredibly different. Here, it's a beacon to finding truth, or not, depending on what you decide to do. You're not the victim here, and it never feels that way. The terrifying imagery that James stumbles across feels pointed. Outside of the more traditional and fun scares, it feels like that very terror is enticing you to wake up. James's awakening didn't just come out of the ether. Although he has no connections to the cult and he doesn't have an innate power that bleeds into the town, his awakening came at the cost of a ritualistic sacrifice of Maria. 3 times she died due to various aspects of his delusion. She was stabbed in the back by Pyramid Head. His perception that the disease killed Mary led to her death behind bars, and then she was basically crucified by Pyramid Head at the end. It takes 2 of those deaths, in addition to reviewing the tape of him murdering Mary, to fully begin to accept reality. All of these things lead him to having to kill his Maria one final time. While there are debates in regards to the specific emotion and reason that led him to killing Mary, I do find it's important to mention that, like the cultists in other games, he too removed Mary's consent out of the equation. Even if you view it as him ending her suffering, the manner in which he went about caused her an immense amount of suffering and pain before she died. If she truly wanted him to kill her, there were less violent means of doing so, and it could have been done in a more caring manner. In that instant, it was truly about him. Of the 4 titles, this is the only one where you are, in fact, playing the role of the murderer. Then there is the aspect of how it took him helping to kill the manifestation of Angela's abuser before he was able to even perceive the hell that she was living in due to all the trauma caused by her being abused. Again, it's truly no wonder why some of the scares and horrific imagery are what they are, and why some of them seem to be telling him about himself. Silent Hill 3 is not only about a cycle of violence and revenge, but this time, the town itself was used to manipulate the protag. Scares such as the infamous mirror room were not only to prey on Heather's insecurities, but allude to an unfortunate future if she didn't take steps necessary to thwart it. Another step in reclaiming herself. A demon or an angel stalking her to make sure she unknowingly follows through with the cult's immoral plans, even by force. Events were set into play to increase her aggression. The scares in this were incredibly violent. If curiosity gets the better of you, you could find yourself in a set piece that slowly drains your health or treats you to a scene where you can hear Heather die in the worst way imaginable. Even with it possibly being a callback to Silent Hill 1, the death in the sewer makes 2 phallic creatures that can kill her. together. The violence is visceral. The horror is personal, but not in the way Silent Hill 2 is. It's incredibly abusive. Even the segment in the haunted mansion is just some other person or construct trying to manipulate Heather's emotional state. Due to the cult being involved, it's no surprise that yet again they're trying to force another woman, or teenage girl in this case, to give birth to a god. Even doubly so considering that this is the daughter of Harry Mason, the man who thwarted their plans last time. Beyond all of the gaslighting and emotional manipulation, she's had her personal space and bodily autonomy violated on multiple occasions due to the supernatural. Through the ritual in childhood, Claudia triggering migraines via the nightmare, Claudia using hate to nourish the fetus inside of Heather. There is even Claudia's backstory in how she was a victim of abuse as well as overly possessive of Alessa. She's another person trying to force Cheryl into a role and define her adolescence, as well as making plans for her journey into womanhood. She fell prey to the same cult, as well as having another parent that views her as yet another tool for their immoral plans. The entire story, including Silent Hill 1, is about Cheryl reclaiming herself. It starts with her protector picking her up on the side of a road and ends with her burying him after reclaiming her body and life for her own. The true terror in Silent Hill 3 is having to face the scary aspects of womanhood. It's walking through dark alleyways by yourself. It's needing to carry a knife or a stun gun for protection. It's the stalkers and strange men walking up to you and not taking no for an answer. The scares in Silent Hill 3 are so effective because it's relatable to so many, even if you've just heard horror stories from other women. In Silent Hill 4, the town was actively used as a means to sacrifice and to break the character down to the lowest of levels. It's the first time where it was actually weaponized against the player to take their life, to make you feel normal and weak. It's about your safe spaces being ultimately corrupted by an outside force. Due to the first-person perspective, it's the first game where it felt like the scares were aimed directly at you, the player, versus just the character itself. Eileen was part of the driving force for Henry, but is also yet another woman who is being forced into a position to become a mother or mother-like figure, while also serving as motivation for the player. While not exact, the signs of possession consuming her body look akin to the trauma that Cheryl went through in the storeroom and at the end of the game. She wasn't just a background character, and the violence afflicted upon her feels more personal due to not only the bond that you grow together, but also her introduction to child Walter. She's grateful for his futile attempts at trying to shield her and inquires about where his mother is. Now, this does feel like it was done in part to manipulate the player into caring more about her than the first victim that you come across. There is also the pervasive feeling that comes from spying on Eileen through the hole in the wall. At bare minimum, a lot of this is sadly either easy to relate to or even easier to stumble upon a real-world example of, and leads to another layer in just how frightening all four of these games are, beyond monsters running through liminal spaces, changing geometry, or staring at you menacingly from in the dark. These four games have a connection that goes beyond the name of the town, and Valtiel's presence as one of the biggest pieces of trash in the entire series. It's also about reclamation, and how some of the victims of this type of violence try to pick up the pieces or find some type of justice, and in some cases succeeded. Alessa's entire goal was stopping the nightmare from spreading and thwarting her mother's machinations. Even though she died, her goal for the chance to live on in peace and with a loving family was achieved through Heather. Lisa had already died, but as a vengeful spirit, she came back and killed Kaufman for his transgressions against her and Alessa. Although Angela doesn't ultimately find peace, I can go on an entire rant about how unfair the town is to her. She does in the life of her abusive father. Heather finds her own path, stops the new god, and is able to reclaim her life and body from the cycle of violence and the cult. She also, through Harry's journal, has it reaffirmed that he truly loved her for being her. Depending on the ending, Elaine, through Henry's help, manages to survive Walter's ordeal. Henry puts him down for good. Having said all of this, it leads me back to my point about scares and the personal connection the one establishes with horror itself. Even amongst all of the death, blood, and gore, there is a tangible feeling of humanity that permeates through the fog. The organic feeling that each terrifying moment feels close to not only the heart of the story, but also the characters themselves. For the most part, it doesn't give the feeling that the scares were thrown into a hat filled with folded pieces of paper, each with the genre's finest scares written on them. The majority of scares, including the jump scares, fit in these first four games organically, or serve a function without breaking the atmosphere entirely. I find the idea that one type of scare is better for the series as opposed to the other is categorically false. They all belong. Thank you for your time and watching. Take care, sweeties.